Must have been pretty glorious when you had the school board on your side voting to remove the masks. But I know it was tight. I mean, I think Tennessee, okay, it's probably mostly Republican in your area. And, probably most people be in favor of taking the masks off. But it was tight, right? It was like 4-3 or 5-4.
5-4, which has actually changed now. It's 6-3. One of the board members that originally voted for a mask mandate has since changed their mind. But it was 5-4, but that's all we needed to keep it parental choice.
That's the way it works.
And honestly, it's an elected board, and they voted more than once. It wasn't a one-time thing. They voted 3 times, and again, they all had the same solution, was to keep it parental choice. And my girls attended one of the bigger elementary schools in the county. And I can tell you, probably going to school those 7 weeks unmasked, about 90 to 95% of kids were coming to school unmasked. And this is right at the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall, when the Delta surge was happening. And it was really a really sad day in Knox County for a lot of families.
So then, right, so everything's going along swimmingly, as we've seen in every jurisdiction that has lifted the mask mandate or refused to impose one in the first place. In no county, not one, have we seen some massive surge or even detectable or reportable surge in COVID cases. It's just not happening, contrary to those who want to pretend otherwise. So in your school, you got what we've been covering now is a trend. You got a lawsuit filed by first 3, now 4 students claiming that they have a recognized disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that the only reasonable accommodation that the school can provide to protect them is mandatory masking of all students, teachers, staff, and so on. And it went to a federal district court, a George W. Bush appointee, and what did he rule?
He ruled an injunction, so the trial is still occurring, or going on, I should say.
He imposed a preliminary injunction, meaning the masks have to stay on.
Yes. And he stated very little exemptions. Originally, when he sent down the mask mandate on the 24th of September, he said that children with autism and trachs could have an exemption. But then you had several families that their children need exemptions as well, and they were not included. And so you have a lot of parents also fighting like the Dickens to try to get their children out of the mask because whether they have special needs. We have over 3,000 kids in our county that receive some sort of speech therapy or speech services from Knox County schools, and they can't even get mask exemptions. You have friends that their children do get a mask exemption, but their teacher is masked. And so they also don't realize that these children rely on being able to see their teacher's expressions in their teacher's mouth to understand what they're saying.
Right.
So it's really sad that children that really need a mask exemption are struggling to get them.
So here's my question.
Because of the judge.
We covered this out of Pennsylvania a week or two ago, and the alleged disabilities they ranged from like obesity to ADHD, which ADHD does not make you more prone to a negative outcome from COVID. Obesity may, but it depends. But in any event, they were unspecified. In this case, you've got 3 kids who sound very troubled in terms of the physical issues that they're up against. I accept that these are disabled children based on what I read in the complaint anyway. There's one with chronic lung disease, an autoimmune condition, autism. They use a feeding tube. I mean, it goes on. Another one, a 12-year-old, just so the audience understands, has something called, I think it's Joubert syndrome, rare genetic disorder, brain malformation, uses a wheelchair, a feeding tube, and so on. And then a 10-year-old 4th grader with Shone's complex, rare congenital heart disease, restricts blood flow, feeding tube, and so on, numerous open heart surgery. So I think we can both accept that these are legitimately disabled children.
100%. And that, I certainly would not want to discount or devalue those children and what their needs may be. Where I have issue with is that according to the ADA, it's a reasonable accommodation. And I find it hard to believe that the reasonable accommodation is to mask 60,000 other children. And I mean, I'm not like you, Megyn, I'm not a lawyer, but I did read about the ADA, and I don't know how my child's face can be a part of making an accommodation for other children. And with these families, I believe a few of those children are learning virtually. And why can't we make a solution that doesn't impact all of 91 schools in Knox County? Right. So I am for, let's find them a reasonable accommodation. I am for, let's do something that can get these children back in school. I just don't think masking the rest of the children in Knox County is the solution.
Right. I mean, even if you really want to, accept that other people have to wear masks to accommodate the children, what about just those classes or even just those schools, the entire school district, exactly. 60,000 kids? That makes no sense. But what about the fact that, more and more doctors now, and these are people who are, you see them on CNN, they went to Harvard. These are not sort of right-wing doctors. I hate to make medicine a right-wing, left-wing thing, but it has become it in COVID. They're saying one-way masking works. One-way masking, if it's an N95, is sufficient to protect the wearer. And this lawsuit was filed at a time when COVID was surging, and not, the way it stands today, it doesn't take recognition of the fact that Omicron has come through and gone and created probably herd immunity, and we're not dealing with the same situation. So can't you get the lawsuit thrown out on that basis? Because I know it's pending in front of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. You guys have filed it and you're waiting to argue it, but there's new information the court needs to hear.
I would agree. And also when the court or the Judge Greer issued his injunction, the day that he issued it, there were 0 new cases in 5 to 17-year-olds of COVID that day. Because I watched the COVID database pretty regularly. And now, and also back then, vaccines weren't available for 5 and up. And now they're available for those school-age children. So my question is, can these disabled children, are they able to get the vaccine that would help protect them? I mean, so there's a lot of variables that were not in play that are in play now. And I think where a lot of parents have a lot of frustration is we are handcuffed to this case. And, we have a law director that's also an elected official that has been defending this case for the Knox County School Board. And then the Attorney General of Tennessee is doing it for Governor Lee. So we as parents, we're just clueless as what can we do? We feel so helpless because my husband and I actually ended up pulling our children after the holidays and putting them in private school. Just because with a kindergartner, first grader, how can you learn how to read and understand phonics when you're masked up 8 hours a day? They did get a break, weather pending, when they were at recess and at lunch. So it really was heartbreaking. And there's tons of families that really their children are struggling with sensory issues, high anxiety from the mask. And I just feel like Judge Greer's not even taking those children into consideration. Right.
They cater to the most vulnerable denominator, which in some circumstances might make sense. But now we've got vaccines and we've got therapeutics and we know a lot more about COVID. And it's like, well, how are these children functioning outside of the school? Do the parents ever bring them anywhere? Because you cannot mask society indefinitely.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, Megyn, is like I mentioned, the University of Tennessee is here. So we were going to football games and indoor basketball games with thousands of other people. Nobody wears a mask anywhere else in Knox County. There's not a mask mandate in grocery stores and churches, the university and workplaces. So, but our children have to go 8 hours a day and they have to be masked. So that doesn't even make sense, because even though they're masked at school, they're not masked the other hours of the day that they're not at school.
Well, and these other students, the vulnerable students that have filed the lawsuit, presumably have been at school either in the beginning of the school year when masks were not required, or prior to COVID when we've had outbreaks of things like pneumonia or, transmissible diseases that could be problematic for them. I mean, this is an individual decision that parents in the unfortunate position of having kids who are this vulnerable have to make. But in no world did we ever look around and say every single other person in my district, in my state, must change the way they behave for the majority of the day with their children to accommodate me.
Exactly. And I think we have to take a holistic view of it. I mean, it's not just our physical health. And as we've seen with speech therapy, that's on the rise for kids because they've been long-term masked. You have other issues that are going on, social, behavioral, and just even for young children that are learning to understand expression and relate to their peers. It's not just about our physical. And so again, do you want to drive home that I empathize with these families. I can't imagine what that's like to have to make those choices. But Judge Greer's injunction to mask all 60,000 kids and 9,000 members of staff that's just not acceptable.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.